Hey guys, Rafe here from Involvement Play. Today I'm with Katy Bowman. Katy is the author of 8 books about natural movement, dynamic aging, and movement ecology, and many other subjects that are related to movement. She's been immensely influential in my own movement practice and my understanding of movement. So I'm very grateful to Katy for appearing on the podcast today. Is there anything you'd like to say to introduce yourself?
Just thanks for having me, first of all, and hello to everyone out there. And I guess about myself, I like to talk about movement. We both like to talk about movement. I like to write about movement, but I like to move more than doing either one of those other things that I was talking about. So yeah.
So let me ask you just to start. What does movement look like in your life right now? Can you give people a breakdown of perhaps the practice of movement isn't the right word for you, but your practice of movement?
Well, if we just talk about movement as simply being things that move your body in any physical way, I mean, you want like a 24-hour period
Sure.
of a 24-hour period of movement? Well, I have tried to execute a lot of things by reclaiming previous like movements that I had not been getting in due to various technologies in my house. So like I'll grind my own coffee beans in the morning for coffee, right? Because that was something that I could do like this, but now I can do it like this with a slightly older piece of machinery. I'll walk, trying to do something like usually to the post office in the morning, or I might meet my friends early in the morning to do a longer stretch. I try to incorporate a longer distance bout of walking. So something 3 to 5 miles every day, and then try to get upwards of the 10 to 20 mile range monthly. So if it's a 20-mile day, then that's all I do. Mostly on the bulk of a day is walk, but on an average day, I'll walk a little bit, come home, get my kids ready to go to nature school, often like parking farther away to walk them to school and back. I work, as obviously I'm a hyper producer of writing books, so I still do that, but I've tried to make it as movement rich as possible. So I have standing, and I have a dynamic work setup, meaning in my office there's places to stand and sit, lots of various tools and textures that can be moving lots of parts of me even when I'm fairly still, because I can't leave my keyboard. And then when I notice a lull of productivity that would normally send you to social media or something while you're still sitting there, I'll use that as a cue to get up and step away, because I'm obviously not being productive or creative in that moment, and take care of some other task or just move, for the sake of movement. And then I teach a couple classes a week, and during those classes is when I will lead other groups of people through some of the more refined movements. And the way that I look at those types of movements is we have so many adaptations to basically to our habitat. You and I have a similar habitat as probably most people watching. It's technologically like computer full, whatever this new technology isn't even the right word, because that would put like a moccasin with my smartphone in the same category. So information dense, things that you're getting, screens like those, they have a particular physical bending of your body, chairs and shoes and all those things. So the movements that I teach are really trying to look for local sedentarism inside an otherwise active body. So if you've read Move Your DNA, I know you have, a lot of those movements, you're a super active guy. So many people are movers. I have Olympians that come in, like they're not classically sedentary, and they're not even not classically sedentary, meaning they're moving upwards of like 5 or 6 hours a day, but they're not moving all of them. So there are these like sedentary spots, groups that are clusters of sedentary cells. So I like to teach correctives where someone could kind of assess their body to see, wow, I didn't realize that when I thought I could move here, but I'm really moving a hinge up here, so that one could distribute their movement more evenly or continue to pursue their larger movements using more of their body, which makes them more sustainable. Like, so athletes, they do a lot of smaller repetitive motions often, or even when something looks super diverse, even like climbing a tree will use lots of you, but the amount of diversity of movement that you need is probably so great that unless you're moving all day long like someone subsisting, it's hard to get all of the areas. So to kind of just look through your own body and see, I didn't realize this wasn't moving, I'll address it in some way. And then my house, you've been to my house, so you know it's set up for movement. We don't have we don't have furniture in the classic sense. So if I'm taking rest, like anyone watching Netflix or whatever, it's going to be on the floor. Just to, I'm not doing any exercise down. Sometimes I do exercise on the floor because there's all that space, but just the act of getting up and down on the floor to take rest, it has more movement to it. And our beds are, there's been so many tours in my house, like our beds are low. We do a lot of floor sleeping or ground sleeping. And then we try to, we've been trying more and more to actually live outside more and more, cooking, our kitchen to low tables, chopping, but then like really trying to go like, what would it be like to actually live outside? And if you camp, you get a sense of what that's like, but when you do it for extended periods of time, you're like, wow, there's a lot more movement that goes into warmth and food when you're doing it in that way. So that's really how I get my movement these days.
Awesome. Okay, that's super interesting, and I know I can speak to it a little bit because after reading Move Your DNA, I adopted working on the floor as opposed to working on my couch. So I'll stand or I'll work on the floor. And I noticed right away that, or after a period of time, that a lot of the mobility work that I needed to do to maintain my ankles, hips, and knees kind of disappeared as a necessity, right? That flexibility just came from the activities that I was doing. So that's, I think, it's a huge thing that people can do, and it's actually something I recommend to everybody who comes to my seminars. It's like, if you can adopt not sitting in chairs. We're sitting sort of in chairs today, but I don't think it's a negative thing so much, except in the way that it sits in place of all these other movements that would be moving our bodies.
Yeah, sitting in chairs is fine. It's like it's the frequency of it, and the fact like I don't have any chairs that put my knees and hips to this particular angle. So this is me moving uniquely right now. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that I've been kind of struggling with in my own conceptualization of movement that comes up there is, so you said something about in order to move all the pieces of your body as much as they need, you would have to kind of live the life of a hunter-forager. And so I've been thinking about this idea of movement as a big picture, right? So there's I would say most of my audience is part of movement culture, and they look at movement as skills, or a family of skills or ways of doing interesting things with your body. And I think what your work does is it sort of opens up the idea of movement to a much broader lens that includes essentially any time that you're displacing your body. Now, the question that I have been kind of circling around is how much, well, I don't think we know, and I want to ask you about this, but all these little micro movements that happen in the life of a hunter-forager, that happened in a traditional life before we had all these technological aids, it seems to me that there's probably I guess the impression that I get from Move Your DNA is you need to move more, which is really a great call to action. But the question that I have is how would we go about even establishing a homeostatic norm, right? It's like you need to be walking. Humans walked for a certain amount of time throughout a long period of time of their evolution. So there's going to be a norm that kind of maintains the physiological health of the human being. But then they also would have been very variable from one environment to another. And so there's probably a range in which we can function. There's a range in which actually there's too much and we start breaking down, a range that's insufficient and we start breaking down the other way, we start atrophying. So I'm curious if you can talk about how you think about that aspect of where is the homeostatic range of this huge diversity of movement that we can then start articulating out. How would we even go about answering that question on something that's so much more vast than like what's your VO2 max?
Well, that's why I call my work nutritious movement, because I think at the end of the day, which is going to be 400 years from now, we will understand that the approach to understanding what you're calling homeostasis, it would be like, I would probably use the word like your nutritional guidelines. Like what are the movement nutritional guidelines? Like what are the minimums? And that's what nutrition gives us, right? It says like you have an RDA. Now, of course, that's a bit flawed in that a nutrient is identified, it's like first we have to identify a nutrient. I'm going to be all over the place right now because it's one of those things. We're talking about something very large, and it's almost like it's gone from your brain, and then you have to go find it again because we're talking about things that we don't even have languages for yet.
Absolutely.
So first we have to have what is a nutrient. So we know what a nutrient is, and we rattle them off so easily. They make so much sense for us, this idea that you need vitamin A and D and E and K, and you need small chain triglycerides, and you need proteins, carbs, and fats. Like, so someone has done all of this work categorizing all of these things for us, and we got them in elementary school, frankly, you know, and maybe a little bit, you know, at university or later on in high school, or just through engaging and reading the internet. That body of understanding took 500 years and is still in progress, right? Like, we're still finding, I mean, now there's a microbiome, like the fact that like what's on the things that you put on your mouth might also be at play, or an environment in which you're eating might also be considered things that you need. So nutrients are identified in hindsight by looking at populations of people that, for whatever particular, usually a natural, they are natural experiments, like prisoners or sailors, groups of people that for whatever reason have been isolated or behaved as a cultural anthropologist, right? They share a certain set of behavior. And so it makes them a particular group where they're sharing inputs, but then maybe you would see certain things erupt from that particular group that another similar-ish group, same human beings, same modern human beings, but who live in a different environment, eat different foods or whatever, they have a different set of physical experiences. So then you start to go, well, what's different between the two? Why are their bodies behaving so differently? And then you begin to say, oh, well, they were eating these foods, and then you identify foods that might be important, and then you get out your microscopes, and then you look in your foods, I find the process of vitamin C discovery to be really amazing, and maybe a great place to start. And it's interesting. So they had sailors and also prisoners, they bring that up less in second grade, who had a particular diet. They were limited because obviously they were bringing all their food with them, and through experimentation, maybe like no experts doing it, but they recognized like over time that it was a lack of fruits and vegetables, right? So then they started to work back, and then but someone had already found on a ship that if they could give their sailors oranges or citrus fruit, that they wouldn't have those same symptoms. So like, okay, well then what is in this?
What we call the Brits limeys.
Is that what it is? Oh, that's right. I remember hearing that before. So then it's like, what is it about an orange? And so they thought it was one particular part of what was in an orange, because you obviously can't fill the holes of a boat with a ship journey's worth of fruit because it'll go bad. So they started to extract into particular vials, and everyone took that. That didn't work. So whatever they had extracted, they knew it was of a citrus fruit, but what they had chosen to parse in that case wasn't the right thing. So through lots of, now we're at a microscope level of process, found what the actual active component was that addressed, what was the nutrient specifically that addressed that particular disease. And they're all kind of like that. I mean, vitamin D is also super fascinating, and just to read the histories of those, to see how everyone thought they knew what it was for 80 years or 90 years, and the battles in between. It was like, well, don't be ridiculous, it couldn't be that, which is exactly what happens today. Mm-hmm. It's the nature of a large group of people thinking on one line, and then you experiment and you figure it out, and then over time, it's not like once you have the data everyone goes, oh, there's just an understanding, like has its own momentum, but over time you change. So we got it handed down pretty easily. But why I'm referring back to this with your initial question is, we know that movement is essential, in that if you were like I always go for the extreme example, like if you were completely unable to move for a medical condition and bedridden, you would have to be moved, because the pressure of not moving is enough to start killing the cells in that particular area, and then other systems start shutting down. So we know, like, okay, well, how much do I have to move? More than being in a bed. Okay, so now we have our first data point, and then we are many data points later, and there is a set of data points like, oh, okay, well, to be healthy you need, I don't even know what the US government minimums are, the Surgeon General minimums are, but you need 20 minutes of 3-met exercise, you need this many minutes of strength training. Like we are going down the idea of dosage right now, but people doing those minimums aren't necessarily getting the benefit. And like then the story changes. Well, you need core stabilizing exercises too to add those other things. And so our movement diet has been getting consistently more complex since the 70s and the 80s, right? Or maybe even before then a little bit, as far as the government actually having recommendations. It was calisthenics, but for a certain period of time. Now we're to 10,000 steps is another dosage attempt. But the more people you talk to who are experts in different fields, and the more they say, well, you also need to be doing this. So our dosage keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so now it's how many minutes a day. There are minimums, but we're not exactly sure which health. You have to do weight bearing exercise if you want your bones to be healthy too in your otherwise fit body. And so I think it's going to take hundreds of years. I also think, as far as the technology that's going to be required, one big thing that I think I was trying to do with Move Your DNA is to help recognize that movement is on the cellular level.
Yeah.
Meaning the cellular adaptations that are protective against movement are on the cellular level, it's not like relative to any particular whole body state. And now that's kind of a way of saying that you have to move each one of your parts, because even if you have a ton of really great moving parts, you're sedentary as far as your unmoving parts are concerned, and those areas can load your body in a particular unhealthy way or express distress or disease. So I don't know, I think it's going to be hundreds of years. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I think you and I have maybe defaulted towards more of a natural movement stance, because it's kind of like, well, we don't know all the technicalities that will arise, but there's kind of this idea that what humans have been doing for a long time matches really well with the structure, and because the movements that they did at a particular time is also what created their structure, then they're kind of they're in an ecology or a relationship with each other. And there's a diversity of human experience. Like even if we talk about hunter-gatherer or humans hundreds of thousands of years ago, you're going to have sea-going people, and I've talked about this on my podcast of like, you have sea-faring people, and you can tell by looking at their bones that they're paddlers. So like they're adapting to it, and you have people who, didn't have trees, so like you have quite a diversity. But at the end of the day, what I try to focus on are all the commonalities, assuming that that everyone had to walk from point A to point B quite regularly, and to get an experience of what that would look like and how different it is, if you're in an urban setting, is to go having to get wood to build a fire in a place where there's no place to buy wood. You're like, wow, I am moving and bending all over the place for one fire, for one night of camping. Now imagine doing it every day for 40 or 50 years, and squatting because everyone was going to the bathroom. Right, so so like you've got defecation at least doing sitting, and maybe you have rocks and things to sit on, but chances are, since you're moving, those weren't coming with you. So the ability to move really well to and from the floor and squat down, I feel okay thinking like, well, these are going to be probably some movements that most of the general features of the body that we accept to be human were shaped by short distance walking, long distance walking, using the feet to press into the ground, being able to deal with temperatures in a particular area because there wasn't abundant clothing or even thermostats, so like I stick with those, like so texture walking, hands, like the basics.
I think that was a very striking thing for me in reading your work, was the realization that you can conceptualize like cold exposure and heat exposure as movement for the body.
Yeah.
And that's a training that we need. It's an adaptation that we need. So,
but it's a muscular movement.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the thing. Like there are so many non-fitness movements, non-skill related movements, but only because you are setting the skill. So the more skills you set for yourself, the more movements are going to be required.
So this is an idea that's come to me in kind of in reference to your work, as well as my friend Stephen Ian. But I've started to conceptualize I don't, it's not exactly movements, but it's things that we experience in our life as kind of divided between nourishments, nutrients, and stimulants. And I wanted to kind of get your take on this. So to me, a nourishment is a thing that traditionally existed, right? That's been around for a long time. So the sun is a nourishment. We don't necessarily know all the ways in which the sun nourishes
Correct.
the body. A citrus fruit is a nourishment. And then as we've gone through the process of reductionism in science, which has given us this enormous technological power, it's put some blinders on us because we start to think of things as the nutrients. So that's the isolated piece. Scurvy is cured by vitamin C. So now an orange is a source of vitamin C.
Right.
So we're able to isolate out those pieces in a way that we've never been able to isolate them out prior to this. And that's really valuable in specific circumstances. But there's a potential for hubris which arises where we look at, we say we've figured out all the pieces, now we can build the perfect way to eat based on the pieces. I believe that's called nutrientism in movement circles, and it doesn't really work.
Right.
You can't synthesize something that's better than breast milk. We tried, thought we could, and I think that the same thing is kind of the driving paradigm for me in natural movement. You can't isolate out all the pieces of movement and hope to achieve something that's like the traditional nourishment. And then the stimulant part is when we create things that, when we find specific nutrients, I suppose, or specific isolated pieces that tap into hyper reward circuitry in the brain, or that tap into reward circuitry in the brain and create a hyper rewarding stimulation. Those are the ways in which it becomes very easy to manipulate our behavior in order to make money. So you have these three kind of core pieces. And sorry, because this is becoming not a question so much as a here's my idea, but it felt very connected to a lot of the ideas that you were talking about in Movement Matters. How do we address this idea of reductionism? Reductionism gives us so much power, and yet it also gives us these blinders, and we have to be able to find a balance in the way that we look at these systems between a system's ecological level of thinking and a parts level of thinking, and it seems like your thinking has also been evolving in that direction. And I wanted to kind of give that to you and just let you
see what I would do with it.
Yeah.
So I think about that a lot.
Yeah.
The more you work in biology and think about in terms of biology and specifically like how humans behave as a reflex to their environment. And this was in Movement Matters, this idea that like we are parsers, meaning like we're reducing it either on paper or in thought or sometimes in its structure. But we too are reduced. Like these are reductions. Like we used to be fully integrated in a whole. Like the ultimate nourishment is the earth.
Yeah.
But we've removed ourselves from interacting with it full stop. We've put up many types of walls. Shoes is a wall. Shoes are a wall. A pair of shoes is a wall. The buildings that you live in are walls. Changes in communities are walls. Like we've physically blocked out, sunglasses. Like we've removed it for various reasons. And along with every time you block something, you still needed whatever portion. Like what does a building keep you from?
Keeps you from
light,
temperature.
Noise, temperature, texture, other people's needs sometimes. But you still needed the thing, right? Because you don't know all of the nourishment that's coming from the sun. You know vitamin D and UVB because those are the two things, and light.
Yeah.
But because you don't know what you've lost, you've reverse engineered the technologies that replace the thing that you're simultaneously blocking out, which is kind of what makes it unsustainable in the end, because you harvested the thing to block it out, and now you're harvesting the thing to re-put back what taking down your blocking out would allow you.
We're driving cars to walk on treadmills.
Well, yeah, I mean that is, you think that's like that kind of example, but it's similar. Oh, we need to walk. Okay, well, we have created an entire location where it's not safe for anyone to walk, so then we will make an enclosure of just the element of walking and put you in it. So I think that there is a relationship. This is one of the reasons that I do what I do. I think that there's a relationship between the parsed person and how much the person has to parse to understand and solve. Kind of like, here's a good example I think that most people listening can relate to. Many of our feats were not suitable for not wearing shoes.
Yeah.
Our feet were adapted to shoes. We had to have that. You had to have that structure. To remove it required that you did quite a bit of physical work. You had to basically upgrade the movement and the strength in your feet, which also harvests because you have to eat to fuel this now thing that's making more, you're building more. But the end goal, for the reason that I do it, is to not need the technology which harvests. I'm still harvesting, we're always harvesting. Because we need to exist. But I can choose if I harvest the thing, like less material for my minimal shoes, or wearing bare feet so that I can go through fewer shoes in a lifetime, so that what I harvest is more local to me. It's within my own system. So I did that with the feet, as everyone probably knows, but then I got to the point where I could use my body so I didn't have to have furniture. Because I think of all these things as needs. Like one of the things, like from a philosophical standpoint, is we have this idea of what a human is, what makes a human biologically as far as a taxonomy is concerned. And we have an anatomy. And that anatomy, as far as biological definition goes, is entirely contained within my skin. It's deep to my skin, is my anatomy. But if you can't live without anatomy supports, shoes, clothing, and let's not even talk about for propriety's sake, because you need it, but simply because I couldn't physiologically exist where I dwell without it, then I've started to view philosophically, but it's becoming more real to me, is these are exoskeletons. You know what I mean? Like if I can't function with it, then the energy that goes into my exoskeletons is much higher than the energy it would go into just me. That I could make my consumption much more local to just maybe foodstuffs, or plants that like how to figure out like how everything's coming from basically plants or animals.
Yeah.
It's all coming from plants or animals, or I guess the earth if you want to go inorganic.
Yeah.
That by being more physically robust, I need less exoskeleton, less time in exoskeleton, less consumption overall, besides what it takes to simply build my own physical structure. And then when if you get ill or sick, then those are other technologies or other exoskeletons that prop you up to keep you going. So it's not arbitrarily, I think, for this idea of health, because I think health is, again, maybe it's a nutrient-centric perspective rather than like how can I be more harmonious in terms of the things that I'm after, which is physical robusticity, but for the purpose of daily activities, which is the definition of physical fitness. If my physical daily activities are to be able to walk on a treadmill, that's different than a Hazda, modern people who are subsisting in nature, their daily activities. So because we've set physical fitness up, you could train to have the same physical fitness as a Hazda, but your activities of daily living are so different, you could meet the same capacity for VO2 max or like max heart rate, but what you're doing with your body differs so much, you're not like distributing it all pretty well. So I am approaching movement nutrition in the way that by moving as many parts of my body as possible, I'm distributing nourishment pretty well. By moving more frequently, I'm not only distributing to all my parts well, I'm doing that distribution often. I'm watering my garden frequently. And then I'm choosing to do it in a way where my intention for why I'm doing it is to consume less.
So I wish I had read the end of Movement Matters.
Yeah, you're not there yet, but you're gonna get there.
Because I feel like I'd be able to articulate a question about. It seems like you're talking about that kind of like, what do you move for? And I think this is this really, it's actually been a fundamental question that I've been really digging into and asking myself, because I do jumps. I jump from one high place to another and do
I
scary
have
things
seen
and
the
swing.
video. I know you do. And you look good doing it.
Thank you. And the realization that people ask me, well, what are you training for? What are you training for? That's a question I hear a lot. And I've been trying to dig into the why. And the why that I'm kind of like hearing from you is sort of that it's like George Hebert said, be strong to be useful, but it's almost like be strong to be not self-reliant, but self-contained, self-competent.
I don't think we're ever self-competent, because I think that's a particular perspective. I mean, I think it is to be useful. I like that, be strong to be useful.
Maybe be harmonious.
But yeah, but what is useful? It becomes to be useful because it's very easy to say I'm being useful.
Yeah.
But no one, that you're not. I find that part of natural movement, and I'm not sure if you're there in Movement Matters, where I bring up vitamin community, and I bring up movement ecology and this idea of geese. So it's like a goose's ability to fly well benefits the other geese in the flock. They require a strong lead goose, but there is no strong lead goose. There's just your turn at being the strong lead goose, and it comes after you've been a child for a while, where there is a long training pattern of getting to not have to be the long goose, but watching it being modeled, contributing to your particular level, which is, for many cultures, their play mimics what their end useful goal will be as a grown-up. And so it's always directly, it's training, but it's not training. It's just their role in a particular community. So like this idea of training, again, that's that scientific parse where you have to name things outside of the situation in which they're happening. And who's to know why is anything happening? But I don't know if we would have these same questions if we were looking at different herds of animals and say why are they doing that? We wouldn't project maybe all the things that we're thinking about why we're doing particular things and why they're doing it. Ultimately, it's to survive, right? It's ultimately to survive. It's biological fitness, right? It's to keep your species moving forward. And that's also move your DNA, where I was I see these as flags for species propagation, which is something that maybe hopefully we're all invested in, is that...
I don't know. I think there are some people who are not.
Yeah, but I don't know, is physical fitness wanting to propagate the species or propagate your particular line? If it's your particular line, then those who can propagate, who have access to lots of exoskeletons, they don't need to be as physically robust, perhaps, to be able to get the things that they need, because they're able to get it other ways.
Yeah, I think the fundamental problem is that we've managed to make movement unnecessary, to make competence physically unnecessary for the lives that we live. But I still think it's necessary for our spirit.
See, I would say that we actively try to reduce our movement. Actively, we're constantly pursuing ways to decrease our movement, but at the same time, I think our society really highlights those that are physically fit and wants you to go to the gym and go to that movement place and do your movement. That's what the Olympics essentially are, right? It's like a heralding, really, of highly competent people who just did that. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you be the movers, and we will happily watch you on TV with our Cheerios, because it's you feel like you're part of it when you watch someone else do it. But we all have that biological need to move in that same way. You still have the need for the nutrition, and to me, that's why I'm here, to talk about the difference between exercise and movement, is because we need such a volume to be able to do it. We have the need for it, the need for the distribution. We have the need for the nutrition of it. That to continue to pursue fitness without, or to continue to pursue fitness without looking at how to distribute that movement back into your life, I don't think we're going to meet our nutritional deficit as far as movement goes.
Man, so many ideas.
I know. That's the
This
tough thing about talking to you is
conversation
like, this is like, we should be in college, man.
Yeah.
Where we had 4 years
Yeah.
to just do this.
Well, let me say this, because I think maybe this connects. This is the best connection. There's so many connections I could leverage after what you were saying there, but we'll start with this one, which is what I've found in the why for what I'm doing is what seems to, I think that we train. If you think about training, or let's say practice or orient our life. When we have orientations that give meaning to us, that's fundamentally what's most valuable to us. If survival is not the issue, what we need is something that feels meaningful to us. And so I think of my practice as a practice of forming the most heroic version of myself. And to be heroic in some sense is to be aimed at what is good. And what's good is good for me, it's good for my family, it's good for the broader community, it's good for the world, it's good for the environment. It's like that's how you're trying to describe it. And it seems to me like you're describing something similar. It's like, how do I build movement into my life such that I'm becoming the lead goose? I'm happy.
You know what it is a sustainable flock needs lots of strong gooses. Like, I don't think I would teach.
Yeah.
Like, I could just do my thing and be a strong goose, but it's
perhaps
you need a whole strong flock,
exactly.
Right? You need a flock.
Be the type of person who can become the lead goose when the necessity is there.
Well, but I guess it's always there. But I understand what you're saying about, like, we do perceive that we don't have to participate to survive.
Yeah.
But that's a particular perspective of a particular people who operate under the protection of many systems. They've outsourced protection to many systems. It's not the case for all modern humans right now, whether modern hunter-gatherers or non-modern hunter-gatherers. So I don't know, how do you tune back in to your survival? I feel like to the primal movement or to the movement that a lot of people actually are tuning into. I mean, I don't know, how would you separate something that gives you meaning versus something that is actually nourishing you? Because we don't recognize the nutrients that we don't know about. Someone else has to tell you that they're good for you, right?
I think nourishment and meaning, they might be logically synonymous in some sense.
It'd be interesting to come up with a non-nourishing meaning, like to find one example of something that gave you meaning but didn't nourish you.
Well, it has to nourish you. I mean, a meaning is like a nourishment of spirit.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, I understand. I got that. This is like one of those conversations where I almost need a pen and a pencil and a whiteboard to, like, I just need to diagram it out. There you go. Oh man.
So well, let me say that maybe we can go in a specific direction.
Let's do it. I mean, there's other.
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about this. Like, what would people watching this? What could be like takeaways, or like what are other things that I think could be like, okay, now give me something I can. We got to dial it down a little bit.
I got to the next chapter that I have to read is the goose chapter.
Oh, you're not moving ecology yet. Oh, it's so good.
And then the next chapter after that is the community chapter. What's very interesting about that for me is that my own experiences in teaching right now have been really profoundly about recognizing that actually the thing that people are getting out of my work more than the movement is the community.
Yeah, well, they're getting them both equally.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, you're putting back the parts of an orange.
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe they're at a community deficit more than they were at a movement deficit, so it's more nourishing their lack of community, but it's meeting all those needs. Like, that's what the book is Movement Matters is integrating that there's a way to get all of the things. Exactly. But it requires a dismantling a little bit of elements that are blocking nutrition, movement nutrition, and other community and
that's it's very hard. Like so I teach this week-long retreat, or Return to the Source, and so we're out doing hard physical things all day together. We gather food together. We learn about plants and everything together, and then we prepare a big meal at the end of the day together. We take a sauna and make fire, learn to make fire, and at the end of the week, everybody's favorite thing about the week isn't the jump that they did. It's the connection they made to all the other people
Right.
there. And it's through all those sort of challenges that they develop a group identity and a group meaning. And then they go out back to the world and they talk to me about, like, this is really hard now because
Yeah.
I don't know that. And I don't know what they want to do is create that space in their life
Right.
that does that. Well, that's a big conversation.
Well, and I think that's, we talk about natural movement as, like, we start with sprinting, walking, jumping. Like, we have all these, like, really clear things that make sense, and then we have, but not on texture. Oh, you got to add texture, and then, like, we need trees, and, like, oh, you're supposed to be walking through trees, so you keep adding different things. And community was the next one to really say, this isn't like, it would be fun and help you with your exercise adherence is to do it in a group. It's to say that this is actually a nutrient. It doesn't work if you don't have it like this, because this is nature. Like, all we're doing is reverse engineering nature. But when you're trying to transition, like we transition to minimal shoes, we're transitioning to community. It starts with a class of people. It's nice when you're local, and then it's maybe meeting up afterwards, and then it's like taking care of each other's kids while you're in class, where you're not just a bunch of people who only come together for the exercise part of your life, that you're people who come together for other parts of your life. Because at the end, we've parsed our community. There's the person that you get your exercise from, and the person over here that you get this from, and the person over there, but they're not related to other aspects of your life. And a community is really someone who's sharing all aspects.
So realize we're running low on time here. I wanted to get to some questions from the audience. So one of the things that came up from a lot of people, and something that's been really interesting in my work actually, is the role of vision. And how should people kind of look at natural movement and vision? How can we use a more natural lifestyle to help improve our vision? And what are we missing about the whole idea of vision in a culture that is so narrow that it uses its eyes?
Yeah, right. So that's from Move Your DNA and Movement Matters, where I'm talking about, I added quite a bit of distance vision. So, I mean, vision is the effect of lots of different movements of your eye, but movement is reflexive. It really is, in a natural setting, there are reflexive movements that happen when you're, like, fully immersed in nature, getting the things that you need. So, looking around, we can look at something really tall. I can look for the moon. When you're indoors, you've automatically limited the ranges of motions to your eye. So it's like being indoors is like setting the degrees to which you can move your elbows, and being outside where all distances are viewable, it just increases the range of motion in which you use your eyes. So in the same way, like, because we don't know I shouldn't say that we don't know. I don't know of the specific distribution of movement nutrients, but considering that our eyes probably move to be able to continue to see, or probably a different way of saying it is, you adapt to what you do. So if you only look at things to a certain amount, over time you're only able to see things to a certain amount. And if you wish to see things farther, you actually have to go out and look beyond the ranges of motions that you normally use. And then now there's this idea of natural light being an additional benefit, that it's not only accommodation, which is the change of the shape of your lens based on how far you're looking, but that the contraction of your eye muscles that are allowing the amount of light in is going to change. So you're, again, being out in light, it's not that the light is streaming to you to a nutrient, there's that too, but it's also that your eyes move in response to light, and they move in response to dark. And we've got one level of light plateau. It's like doing one exercise of your eyes all the time. It's like 12 hours of fluorescent.
Sort of like the temperature aspect.
It's all exactly the same thing.
Being outdoors where the light is changing more frequently, the eye has to adapt. This is a very interesting thing that's come out of my practice of natural movement in trees. Frequently, people who come from a parkour background in the urban environment, they find themselves very disoriented moving through the trees because the diffuse light patterns.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So your depth of field is limited by the tree, but also there's light that's coming through the trees, which creates it's actually a very chaotic background,
So there's an
profound
acuity,
effects.
and there's also there's a group of underwater hunters,
Yeah.
and their eyes do things that you didn't. They do things that researchers didn't know human eyes could do, but they actually just tested people not from that group, and they could get children to have that same adaptation simply by going under the water and looking.
That's amazing.
So we're very malleable. We're highly malleable, and what's keeping us from being malleable is the environment in which we're in. And so definitely, as far as vision goes, just mix it up for your eyes as much as possible.
A couple other things that are interesting to me with vision is when you walk across, like when you just walk through flat ground, you adopt a basically 90-degree horizontal horizon line. And when you move through complex terrain, you have to drop your horizon line down. Specifically, like in parkour, when you're encountering things that you have to be very precise with your hand and foot placements, then you have to adopt a horizon line that allows any movement in front of your body to be caught in your peripheral vision. Somebody's flow in parkour is actually to some degree dependent on their ability to hold the right horizon line and keep the right things in their peripheral vision. So it's actually a really profound eye training. And if you can try this experiment, you can hold your eye line, your normal eye line, walk, feel how it glides smoothly across the environment. Then you can drop the eye line to the point where anytime your foot moves in front of your body, that your peripheral vision will catch it. Try to hold that horizon, and you'll find that it's going to be very hard. A lot of times you'll feel it's catching. You actually feel the muscles in your eyes and brain working hard to try and hold that.
Are you dropping the line by moving your head and neck, or by moving your eyeballs?
Your eyeballs.
Yeah, because I guess if you drop your weight forward of your head,
you don't want to change the rest of your movement.
Right.
So that's a very interesting thing. And then of course, foraging is a profoundly interesting place to express the fact that your eyes have capacities that you're not aware of. Like if you are foraging for mushrooms, I don't actually know this in depth myself, but if you're foraging for mushrooms, there's a specific way of focusing that you have to adopt in order to allow the mushroom to pop out from the environment. And this is true of any number of, like looking for animals in an environment if you're hunting.
I've had that phenomenon in Africa before, being with bush hunters and being out there, and they're like, do you see the animal? And I'm like, I don't see anything, nothing. Yeah. And then it's very similar to, they used to be in the mall in the 90s, there were these like pixelated pictures where if you relaxed your eyes, the image would move forward where you could see a three-dimensional. Do you remember what those were? It was that same skill. I was like, I don't see anything because I was holding a particular tension. And then once I relaxed my eyes and I could remember when I was doing it, I'm like, I'm doing the same thing. I wasn't glossing over, I wasn't putting like looking at colors or whatever. I could finally see that something was standing in front of something else. And there were, I kid you not, like probably 40 animals standing right in front of me that I couldn't see before. Someone else whose job it was, whose livelihood comes from using that skill all the time, was able to point them out.
Yeah, so, sorry, this is something that's very interesting to me. One of the things that is beautiful to me about the practice of parkour and all the natural movement stuff that I do is moving through an environment and seeing all the potential for movement. And it creates a story that you move through that becomes engaging and it's enchanting in the world. And as I've started doing natural movement and had all these people come to me, or a lot of my students end up being people who are also interested in bushcraft, and then I work with them and I pick up elements of bushcraft, and you start realizing that there's a story intrinsic to the environment that you're completely blind to. Where are all the animals? So if you walk through the forest and you deeply know the forest, then there's a story about here's where the medicinal plants are.
Oh, yeah, right.
There's a story about this is where the tracks are, which means this is how the animals are moving through the environment.
Right.
Which is this is the
there's knowledge. It's knowledge.
There's knowledge.
It's knowledge.
And that story to me is this incredible ancestral wealth that we've lost. Because if you imagine the impoverishment of not being able to read and all the information that you need at night, it's like we walk through a world that we can't, that we should be able to.
Right.
So that's not a question. Sorry again, but I would say, have you experienced that same sensation of the opening of your eye and how that makes the world actually more meaningful.
I don't know if it makes it more meaningful. I think that I understand more the cultural influence on my perception that I am not part of the natural world. The kind of repetitive that you're different than an animal, you're better, you're more deserving, like that these are all narratives that go along with an inability to almost be and see all of the knowledge that's available there. Right now, I get my knowledge by reading someone else's story, right? So, but there's a separate story that gives equal and maybe even more helpful information, because the payoff usually is directly a mushroom.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or like the payoff is not going, oh, I know the thing now in a way that might not be applicable. Like, I think that's a difference. Like that, I feel like what you're talking about is a way of that our definition of knowing comes from hearing someone else's narrative about something and assuming it as ours. Where more meaningful, I would probably say I have a way of knowing that makes me, again, more capable in this particular environment. I don't know if it decreases my capability of being in another environment. I suspect that it does. I suspect that I don't have an endless capacity to belong to every particular environment at the same time, that I have to pick and engage and adapt to that one. And so I've got half skills, because in order to get the full knowledge here, I'd have to leave the knowledge that I'm getting from over here. But the knowledge over here makes me suited for this environment, and the knowledge over here makes me suited for that environment. So I'm at the point where I'm starting to choose.
Yeah.
How many days? What environment do I want to adapt to?
Absolutely. You have to curate the information that you carry in your brain, so that it allows you to be the version of yourself that you want.
Yeah, I have to let go of the McDonald's jingles from my youth and identify more mushrooms.
Yeah, beautiful. So thank you very much, Katy. It was a really wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
I hope we get to have many more, and I look forward to finishing your book.
Yeah, get on it.
So everybody read that book.
Thanks.